It began like any other Saturday night in a small college town. Laughter, parties, late-night food runs. Just another fall evening in Moscow, Idaho. Students getting ready to wind down, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before Sunday. But by morning, everything changed. For lives were gone, stolen in the dark. A house that once held joy and music now sat eerily silent. Blood-soaked sheets. A dog locked away, unharmed. 2 roommates alive, yet haunted. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Young, bright, beautiful, brutally murdered in their own home while they slept. No warning, no apparent motive, no mercy. In the days that followed, the entire country was gripped by one horrifying question. Who could do something like this? And why? Speculation took over. Was it personal? A random act? A scorned lover? Or someone hiding in plain sight? Weeks passed. Theories multiplied. Cameras pointed at classmates, strangers, even the victims themselves. But nothing prepared the world for what came next. A criminology student, a teaching assistant, a man obsessed with serial killers, sitting quietly just across the state line, grading papers while the town he once studied bled. His name? Bryan Kohberger. DNA linked him to the crime. A knife sheath left behind. Cell phone data that tracked his every move. Surveillance video that caught his car circling the neighborhood again and again. He was arrested more than 2,000 miles away at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He didn't resist. He didn't confess. He didn't explain. And then silence. Courtroom gasps as the evidence piled up. Families wept. Reporters scribbled. Yet Kohberger just stared ahead, stone-faced, unreadable. Then, in July 2025, nearly 3 years after the murders, a guilty plea. No trial. No cross-examination. No answers. He admitted to the killings, but not the why. And so we are left with a chilling truth. A man confessed, for beautiful souls gone, and the motive still locked away in his mind. This is the story of the Idaho 4, of horror in a college town, of families torn apart, of a killer who walked among them and never said why, and maybe never will. Before the headlines, before the manhunt, before the nation turned its eyes to a sleepy college town, there were 4 young lives full of color, laughter, and hope. Kaylee Goncalves, blonde-haired, bold-hearted, a senior at the University of Idaho, majoring in general studies, planning a bright future in marketing. She was just weeks away from graduation. Kaylee was the kind of friend who showed up when it mattered most, the one who made everyone laugh just a little louder. Home was Rathdrum, Idaho. She shared a bond with her childhood best friend so strong, it's hard to put into words. Madison Mogen, Maddie, was that best friend. Also a senior, studying marketing. She and Kaylee were inseparable, often described as 2 halves of the same soul. Maddie was from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She brought light into every room. Photographs show them together on road trips, dancing in kitchens, celebrating milestones side by side. They were more than friends. They were sisters in spirit. Xana Kernodle, a junior majoring in marketing, lived life out loud. From Post Falls, Idaho, she had a magnetic personality, funny, strong, fiercely loyal. Her Instagram told stories of late nights, love, and laughter. She was dating Ethan Chapin, a tall, goofy, lovable sophomore, studying recreation and sport management. Ethan was one of 3 siblings, all triplets, raised in Mount Vernon, Washington. He was new to Greek life, new to the university, but already deeply woven into its fabric. Together, they formed the heart of the house at 1122 King Road. It was a cozy off-campus home, 3 stories, tucked away on a quiet hillside. You drive by and think nothing of it. Just another college house, filled with empty pizza boxes, textbooks, and echoes of youth. But in the early hours of November 13th, 2022, it became a crime scene. 6 students lived there. Only 4 would make it through that night. Downstairs slept Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, the 2 surviving roommates. Young, unsuspecting, tucked away in rooms on the lower level. Their night had started like many others, TikToks, takeout, late-night laughs. But sometime between 4:17 and 4:25 a.m., something changed. Dylan later told investigators she heard strange noises. A thump, a cry, the sound of someone saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And then she saw him, a tall figure in black, mask covering his mouth and nose, bushy eyebrows, silently moving through the house like a shadow with purpose. He passed her without a word. She froze. Some call it shock. Others call it survival. Dylan didn't scream. She didn't run. She shut her door and locked it. What happened upstairs was swift, brutal, unforgiving. The coroner would later report multiple stab wounds. Some victims fought. Others may never have woken up. The house remained quiet until nearly noon, when a 911 call was made from one of the survivors' phones. Police arrived to a scene that defied belief. 4 young lives ripped from the world, and no sign of the killer. No broken windows, no forced entry, just a knife sheath and silence. In the days to come, that silence would grow louder. It would echo through the halls of the university, through news broadcasts, through tearful interviews, through the voices of parents begging for answers. But in that moment, before the crime scene tape, before the world knew their names, there were simply 4 friends, asleep in the comfort of their home, unaware that their lives were about to become part of one of the most haunting true crime stories in American history. And 2 roommates left to carry the memory of what they saw, what they heard, and what they'll never forget. The night of November 12th began like any other weekend for students at the University of Idaho. It was a crisp fall evening, the kind that hums with youthful energy. Music drifting from open windows, laughter spilling into streets, Uber rides darting across town as college kids made their rounds between house parties and downtown haunts. For Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, it was a night of celebration. They headed to the Corner Club, a local favorite. Just 2 best friends enjoying what should have been another carefree Saturday night. They laughed, took pictures, danced. Around 1:30 a.m., they stopped at a late-night food truck, a popular spot known as Grub Truckers. There's a video still online of Kaylee and Maddie waiting for their order, joking with the vendor, completely unaware that someone may have already been watching. At nearly the same time, their housemates, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin, had just returned from a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity, just a short walk away. Ethan was staying over with Xana. They were dating. Their love was young and easy, the kind of bond that makes people believe in joy again. By 2 a.m., all 4 had made it back to the house at 1122 King Road. Lights flicked off, doors closed. Another college night come to a quiet end. But behind that quiet, something sinister stirred. Between 2:44 and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee's phone began to light up with outgoing calls. She dialed her ex-boyfriend several times. So did Maddie. We may never know why. Some believe it was routine. Perhaps she had something on her mind, or just wanted to hear a familiar voice. Others wonder, was she sensing something was wrong? No one answered. What we do know is this. By 4 a.m., terror was inside that house. Investigators would later uncover chilling clues. A dog barking Murphy, Kaylee's golden doodle, restless in the early hours. Cell phone pings, motion sensors, surveillance footage showing a white Hyundai Elantra circling the neighborhood, again and again. And then, sometime between 4:17 and 4:25 a.m., it happened. The masked man entered the home. Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates, would later recall hearing a series of strange sounds. Thumps, whispers, a voice softly saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She opened her bedroom door, peered out. What she saw would haunt her forever. A man in all black, at least 5 feet 10 inches, athletically built. He moved with unsettling calm. His face was partially covered, but one detail stood out, his bushy eyebrows. He walked past her silently and out the back sliding glass door. Gone into the night. Dylan didn't scream. She didn't run. She closed her door, locked it, and stood frozen in fear. Upstairs, Kaylee and Maddie had already been attacked. The killer moved with horrifying speed and precision. Investigators believe he targeted them while they slept. But Xana may have been awake. Evidence suggested she fought back. Bruises, defensive wounds. She may have seen his face, may have known her killer. Ethan, staying over that night, was also attacked. No one would make it out of the second and third floors alive. And then silence. Not a scream, not a cry, just quiet, until the sun rose and the world outside kept moving. It wasn't until nearly noon to 11:58 a.m. that the first 911 call was made. One of the surviving roommates had discovered a body. The caller was in shock. The words used were unclear. The dispatcher knew something was wrong, but not what, not yet. First responders arrived minutes later. What they found inside defied belief. 4 students, stabbed multiple times. No signs of forced entry. No weapon. Just devastation. And a leather knife sheath left beside one of the bodies, stamped with the United States Marine Corps logo. It would become the first major clue. But in those early hours, the town of Moscow was left spinning. Students packed their bags. Parents rushed in. Classes were canceled. Fear settled like fog. Who had done this? Why hadn't anyone heard? How could a killer slip in and out of a 3-story house in a neighborhood full of students without anyone seeing a thing? The answer would take weeks to unfold. But for now, all anyone knew was that something evil had entered that home in the dark and left 4 lives extinguished, and 2 hearts still beating, now forever changed. The city of Moscow had never seen anything like it. For young lives cut short in the middle of the night, no arrests, no suspect, no weapon. The police were overwhelmed, the public terrified, and the parents? They were desperate for answers and angry that none were coming fast enough. As pressure mounted, local law enforcement called in backup. The FBI, the Idaho State Police, digital forensics experts, everyone came in. At the peak of the investigation, over 130 law enforcement personnel were working the case. More than 20,000 tips were received. It became one of the largest investigations in Idaho history. But for weeks, it looked like nothing was working. No arrests, no press conferences, just speculation, rumors, and mounting frustration. But behind the scenes, the puzzle pieces were starting to move. One of the first breaks came from the surveillance cameras mounted around the neighborhood. Police poured over hundreds of hours of footage from homes, gas stations, and university lots. They weren't just looking for a person, they were looking for patterns. And they found one, a white Hyundai Elantra, model year 2011 to 2013. At 3:29 a.m., it was seen driving past the victim's house. Then again at 4:04, and again at 4:20. It circled the block at least 4 times. Not normal behavior for a sleepy residential street at that hour. Not during winter break. Not while 4 students were being murdered inside. Police sent out a call to the public. We're looking for this car. The image was blurry, but they were confident it mattered. That one photo led them to the Washington State University parking database, just 8 miles away. In Pullman, Washington, a white Elantra was registered to a 28-year-old criminology PhD student. His name was Bryan Kohberger. He was quiet, studious, a teaching assistant, known to some students as harsh, awkward, even condescending. But to most, he was just another face on campus. Another guy working toward a degree in criminal justice. As detectives dug deeper, more began to unfold. Kohberger had changed his license plate just days after the murders. His phone records showed strange patterns. On the morning of the crime, he turned it off completely, between 2:47 and 4:48 a.m. But that wasn't all. After the crime, Kohberger's phone pinged near the King Roadhouse at least a dozen times. Most of those pings came in the late evening or early morning hours. This wasn't a one-time drive-by. It looked like surveillance. And then came the DNA. Remember the knife sheath left behind at the crime scene? Investigators had preserved it carefully. And on the button clasp they found something, a single male DNA sample. It didn't match any database. But detectives followed the trail all the way to Pennsylvania, where Kohberger had returned home for the holidays. FBI agents rummaged through the family trash, collected DNA from his father, and ran a match. It was a parental match to the sheath. That sealed it. On December 30th, 2022, a SWAT team stormed the Kohberger family home in the Pocono Mountains. He was arrested in the middle of the night, quietly, without resistance. They found him wearing latex gloves. He had scrubbed his car down meticulously. He was reportedly separating his garbage, perhaps to avoid leaving behind a DNA trace. Investigators would later learn he'd applied for an internship with local law enforcement just months earlier. He had written essays about understanding the criminal mind. He'd even posted a Reddit survey asking ex-cons how they selected victims, how they felt during the crime, and whether they got away with it. He wasn't just studying crime. He was living in it. With Kohberger in custody, police moved fast. They filed a detailed probable cause affidavit, a 19-page document that laid out the case step by step. Phone data, DNA evidence, the vehicle match, the timeline, and the surviving roommate's account of seeing a masked intruder. It wasn't just circumstantial. It was chilling. Still, even as the evidence mounted, one thing remained disturbingly absent: a motive. Why had he done it? Why those 4 students? Why that house? No answers were given. Not in the affidavit. Not during the extradition hearing. And certainly not from Kohberger himself. He just stared forward, silent, still, empty. The public wanted closure. The families wanted justice. But the most haunting question of all still lingered in the air. What could possess someone to walk into a house filled with sleeping students and kill 4 of them in cold blood? The arrest shocked nearly everyone who knew him, not because he was a monster in disguise, but because he didn't seem like one at all. Bryan Christopher Kohberger was no drifter, no shadowy figure lurking in the background. He was a doctoral student at Washington State University, just across the state line in Pullman. He was studying criminology. He lived alone in a small apartment in university housing, just 15 minutes from the crime scene. He shopped at the local grocery store, drove a white Hyundai Elantra, taught undergraduate students how to analyze criminal behavior. Some of them would later describe him as odd, cold, even condescending in class. But most said he was just another academic, a little intense, a little awkward. Few knew that behind that quiet exterior, a far darker obsession was brewing. Kohberger had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder from a young age. He'd also struggled with social and sensory issues, possibly connected to autism spectrum disorder, though never formally confirmed in court. He was described by former classmates as socially isolated, especially in high school. His weight fluctuated drastically. He reportedly battled addiction. But over the years, he seemed to pull himself together, earning degrees, publishing academic work, chasing a career that allowed him to study what most people feared: serial killers. But now, the student had become the subject. In the weeks after the murders, Kohberger's behavior grew increasingly suspicious. He began wearing latex gloves in public, not just at work, but at home, in the car, even while handling trash. One neighbor in Pennsylvania recalled seeing him scrubbing his vehicle obsessively in the cold, vacuuming every inch of it at odd hours. He had cleaned his white Hyundai inside and out with such precision that forensic investigators later said it was clear evidence of an attempt to eliminate trace evidence. But no amount of scrubbing could remove the digital trail, or the DNA on the knife sheath left at the crime scene. The FBI had been tracking Kohberger for weeks, watching his movements, digging into his past, collecting evidence, silently, as he tried to blend back into suburban life during the holiday break. Then, on December 30th, 2022, the silence broke. A team of FBI SWAT officers raided the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, at approximately 1:30 a.m. He was found in bed, asleep. He did not resist arrest. There was no confession, no fight, just calm, just stillness. In that moment, Kohberger was no longer a student, no longer a researcher. He was a suspect in one of the most horrific murder cases in recent memory. Authorities recovered key items during the arrest: black gloves, a flashlight, masks, a computer tower, a shop vac, and several strands of hair. But what haunted investigators the most was how calculated he had been. The trip across the country after the murders, the phone being turned off during the time of the killings, the trash being sealed in Ziploc bags, the cleaning, the gloves, the quiet, and perhaps most haunting of all was what they didn't find: the murder weapon still missing, and the motive completely unknown. Bryan Kohberger was extradited to Idaho in early January 2023. He arrived shackled, expressionless. In court, he appeared blank. No emotion, no apology, no explanation. The families sat just feet away, staring into the face of the man accused of slaughtering their children. And he stared straight ahead. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The state of Idaho began preparing a death penalty case. But even with the evidence mounting, even with the world watching, one question remained unanswered. Why? Why that house? Why those victims? Why that night? Kohberger offered no clues, no breakdown, no twisted manifesto, just silence. And for the grieving families, that silence hurt almost as much as the loss itself. After his arrest, Bryan Kohberger was no longer a shadow in the dark. He was now a defendant, a name in black ink on court documents, a face behind thick glass, surrounded by marshals and stunned silence. But the path to justice was anything but straightforward. The legal process began swiftly. In early January 2023, Kohberger was extradited to Idaho and appeared for his first hearing in the Lotta County Courthouse. Reporters filled every seat. Families sat with clenched jaws and tear-stained eyes. Kohberger stood tall, shackled, stoic. He said little. He looked at no one. At his arraignment in May 2023, he stood before Judge John Judge. When asked how he pleaded to the 4 charges of first-degree murder, he chose not to respond. The judge entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. The prosecution quickly made their position clear. They would seek the death penalty. Idaho is one of the few remaining states where capital punishment remains firmly on the table. And in a case this brutal, with 4 victims, families and citizens alike demanded it. But that choice opened up a long and winding road. A death penalty trial meant months, possibly years, of pretrial motions, delays, and national headlines. Public defenders prepared to fight. The case would require a change of venue, moved from the small town of Moscow to Boise, where the jury pool would be less saturated by local grief. For over a year, court dates came and went. Gag orders kept the public in the dark. Legal teams worked behind closed doors while families waited endlessly. Then came the unexpected. On July 2, 2025, Bryan Kohberger appeared in court and changed his plea, guilty, to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The courtroom froze. Gasps, cries, disbelief. The man who had spent nearly 3 years saying nothing, offering no hint of emotion or motive, had suddenly admitted to it all. There was no trial, no testimony, no cross-examinations. Just one statement from his defense attorney. Kohberger would waive his right to appeal and accept life in prison without parole in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. He would die in prison, but not at the hands of the state. Judge Nancy A. Hippler, who presided over the plea, seemed taken aback. According to reports, she paused, visibly surprised. She made sure Kohberger understood the weight of what he was doing. He confirmed it. Yes, he understood. He pleaded guilty to each charge. One by one, calm, quiet, direct. Kaylee's mother sobbed in the front row. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, stared forward, fists clenched. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously, some stunned into silence. The state accepted the deal. It was done. After nearly 3 years of pain, waiting, and speculation, the legal chapter had closed. There would be no more hearings, no appeals, no cameras in courtrooms, but also no trial, no motive revealed. No answers to the questions that haunted the families most. Why those four? Why that house? Why that night? When asked if he wished to make a statement about the motive, anything at all, Bryan Kohberger simply said, "I respectfully decline." That was it. And with that, the courtroom exhaled. A man had confessed. A killer was off the streets. But justice, while swift on paper, still left the families hollowed out and aching. Because even a guilty plea can't bring peace when you don't know why your child was taken. And the silence, the same silence that followed the murders, lingered like a shadow over everything. July 23, 2025. 9 months after Bryan Kohberger's arrest. 3 weeks after his surprise guilty plea. And nearly 3 years after the murders that shattered a community. Inside a quiet Idaho courtroom, the families of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan stood, one by one, and faced the man who took their children. This was not a trial, but for many of them, it felt like the only chance they'd ever have to speak directly to him. To say the words they had rehearsed in their minds 1,000 times. To let the weight of their grief echo in a room that had heard too much silence for too long. The sentencing hearing began in the morning. Cameras weren't allowed, but the words spoken that day have lingered across the country. Kaylee Goncalves' mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. She talked about her daughter's dreams, about how she was days from moving to Texas for a new job, how Kaylee loved fiercely, how she always stood up for others. She looked directly at Kohberger and said, "You destroyed us. You didn't just kill her. You killed every part of our future." Maddie's father described the unbearable quiet in his home. "There are mornings I wake up and for a second, I forget she's gone," he said. "Then it hits me again, over and over, every day." Xana's family talked about her energy, how she could fill a room with a single laugh. Her younger siblings no longer sleep through the night. Her mother hasn't touched her bedroom since the day she died. Ethan Chapin's triplet siblings stood together, arm in arm. One of them whispered through tears, "He was our protector, our glue. I don't know how we're supposed to move forward without him." Then came Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate who had seen the killer in the hallway that night. Her voice was steady, but what she said shook the courtroom to its core. She described waking up to strange noises, the sound of crying, thuds, the dog barking, then the man in black moving past her door. "I couldn't move," she said. "I froze. My body shut down. I've asked myself every day since, why didn't I do something? Why didn't I scream? But I couldn't. I was in frozen shock." She described the guilt, the nightmares, the fear of closing her eyes at night, the weight of surviving when others didn't, and how she still hasn't stepped foot in a house alone since. But the most chilling words came from Kaylee's father, Steve Goncalves. He stood before the judge and held nothing back. Through tears and fury, he revealed that evidence had been shown to the family in the weeks before sentencing. Evidence never made public. Details too disturbing to repeat. He said authorities found pornography on Kohberger's devices. Porn that was violent, dark, focused on domination, on control, on sexual sadism. "He didn't just kill my daughter," Steve said. "He hunted her. He studied her. And when he was done, he walked away like it meant nothing." He demanded the world remember that this wasn't just a story. It wasn't just a headline. These were real people with real lives, stolen in the cruelest way imaginable. And Kohberger? He sat quietly. No reaction. No apology. Just the same blank stare. When the final statement was read, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Hippler addressed Kohberger directly. She reminded him that he had confessed, that he had agreed to die in prison, that no further legal motions would be allowed, his future forever locked behind bars. She then formally sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus another for burglary. As she read the final words, some family members wept. Others simply stared forward. There was no celebration, no relief, just grief and the finality of knowing this chapter had closed. But even as the gavel fell, one thing remained. He still hadn't said why. The courtroom emptied slowly. Some hugged, Some collapsed into chairs. Others simply walked out in silence. For the Goncalves, the Chapins, the Mogen and Kernodle families, for Bethany and Dylan, for everyone who had lived through the nightmare of November 13th, 2022, justice had been served. But healing? That would take much longer. When Bryan Kohberger stood in court on July 2nd, 2025, and pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, the courtroom braced itself. Not because they doubted what was coming, but because they hoped, for just 1 second, that he might offer something more. A reason, a sentence, a word, anything that could help them understand what had driven him to butcher 4 people in their sleep. But when Judge Hippler asked him directly, "Would you like to make a statement explaining your motive?" Kohberger responded in a calm and even tone, "I respectfully decline." He looked down. He said no more. And just like that, the last chance for answers disappeared. For the victims' families, that moment cut deeper than any sentence could. They had come looking for justice, but many had also come searching for closure, a why, a how, something they could explain to their hearts, to their other children, to the generations who would grow up asking what happened to Kaylee, to Maddie, to Xana, to Ethan. Instead, they got silence. And that silence has left behind a chilling space, now filled with speculation, fear, and a dark kind of imagination no parent should ever have to live with. Theories have emerged, not from Kohberger himself, but from experts, journalists, internet sleuths, and even the victims' families. Some believe he stalked the victims. Phone data showed Kohberger near the King Road home at least 12 times before the murders, almost always in the evening or early morning. Was he casing the house? Watching? Planning? One disturbing theory suggests that Kohberger may have fixated on one of the victims, perhaps Kaylee or Maddie. Some reports indicate he followed their social media accounts. Others suggest he may have tried to message them, only to be ignored. And in the darkest corners of this case, the whispers turn to misogyny, to hatred of women, to the toxic stew of male entitlement, rejection, and rage that has inspired so many killers before him. Some draw comparisons to Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista killer who left behind a manifesto blaming women for his loneliness. Rodger believed he had the right to take revenge on the world for not giving him the love he felt entitled to. Did Kohberger feel the same? Was this his way of proving control, dominance? Revenge for invisible wounds only he believed existed? In court, Kaylee Goncalves' father, Steve, referenced pornography found on Kohberger's devices. Not ordinary content, but violent, degrading, disturbing. It painted a picture of a man whose fantasies may have been deeply entangled with cruelty and control. But again, all of this is theory, because Kohberger has said nothing, not one word about why he did it. And he's made it clear he doesn't plan to start. The families are divided. Some, like Maddie's mother, say they are grateful the plea spared them a trial, that they don't want to hear any more details, that knowing he'll never breathe free air again is enough. Asterisk others, like the Goncalves family, are furious. They feel robbed of the full story. They wanted the trial. They wanted the evidence laid bare. They wanted to look into his eyes and ask him face to face why. They may never get that chance. And so the motive remains a void, a black hole in the center of a story filled with facts, but still aching for meaning. For the rest of us, those who have followed this case from afar, it's a reminder of just how fragile justice can feel. You can have the killer, you can have the confession, you can even have the sentence. But without the why, you never truly have the whole truth. You're left with questions that claw at the edges of every memory. A door that never fully closes. For students were murdered. The killer has been caught, but the shadow he left behind still stretches over every life he touched. By the end of 2023, the house at 1122 King Road was no longer standing. It had become too much, too visible, too haunted. To some, it was evidence. To others, a symbol of unbearable pain. In December 2023, with the blessing of the victims' families, the University of Idaho demolished the house. What replaced it wasn't a building, but a promise. a memorial garden was announced, a quiet space for students and families to reflect, to grieve, to remember. Plans were made to dedicate scholarships in the names of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, so their legacies wouldn't end with tragedy, but continue in acts of generosity and opportunity. On campus, the impact is still felt every day. Students now double-check their locks. Roommates talk more openly about safety. Professors allow more grace. The sense of innocence that once blanketed this mountain town is gone, but in its place, there is caution and connection. The university created new policies for security, communication, and crisis response. Counseling services expanded. Professors paused lectures to talk about grief, about trauma, about what it means to go on living in the shadow of something like this. The gag order, which had silenced law enforcement, lawyers, and even families for over a year, was finally lifted after Kohberger's plea. Only then did the public begin to understand the full scope of what investigators had pieced together, how close they came to losing evidence, how carefully they built their case, how deeply the survivors had been affected. And now, as the dust settles, the story continues, shifting from crime scene to cultural memory. Documentary crews have begun production on what will likely be the definitive telling, a feature called One Night in Idaho. There's also a forthcoming true crime book by veteran reporters Grace Patterson and Dylan Ward, based on hundreds of hours of interviews, sealed court documents, and personal accounts from the families themselves. But for the people of Moscow, Idaho, the story doesn't live on a screen or in a chapter. It lives in the air, in the silence, in the empty space where laughter used to echo. It lives in the weight students carry as they walk to class, in the nervous glances out dorm windows, in the friendships that grew tighter because of what was lost. The town has slowly reopened itself to the world, but it will never be the same, because some places, some people, are forever marked by what they survive. For lives were stolen in the dark. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. They weren't just victims. They were daughters, sons, best friends, bright sparks in the world, extinguished too soon. Their loss sent a shockwave through their families, their school, their town, and the world. The investigation that followed was one of the most intense in recent memory. Hundreds of agents, thousands of tips, digital forensics, DNA pulled from a knife sheath, and the slow unraveling of a suspect hiding in plain sight. Bryan Kohberger was found, arrested, charged, and ultimately he confessed. But even now, with him behind bars for the rest of his life, one thing still hangs in the air like smoke. We don't know why. He has never told us. And legally, he may never have to. That silence continues to haunt every corner of this case. Was it obsession? Rejection? A calculated fantasy come to life? Was he trying to prove something? Or erase someone? What drove Kohberger to stalk that house? To climb those stairs? To end 4 lives in such brutal fashion, and then walk away as if none of it mattered? Should someone who pleads guilty to such horrific crimes be required to disclose their motive? Does justice mean punishment or truth? Those are the questions we're left with. And now we ask you, our viewers, to reflect with us. What do you believe was behind Bryan Kohberger's actions? Do you think the plea deal was right? Or should the families have had the chance to face him in trial? Motive and all? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe these victims deserve to be remembered and their stories deserve to be told, please share this video and subscribe for more real, human stories about the people behind the headlines. Because true crime isn't just about mystery, it's about memory, and we owe it to them to remember.